folks, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Natasha and I do book things here. Today's video is going to be my January 2019 wrap-up. I talk about all the books that I read in January, I give you guys my stats, and I talk about them from worst to best books. So that whole format's not changing in 2019. I found it really worked for me. However, I am using a spreadsheet now where I get to see little graphy dudes, and I'll try to include them in all these videos. So before we get into the books, I'll give you guys my stat breakdowns. I read 15 books in the month of January, which is way more than I've been reading in the last couple months of 2018, so that's fun. It was out to 4,984 words, or pages read, not words, pages read. The average book then is 332 pages, which is weird because I read 2 tomes and then a bunch of graphic novels, and I feel like shorter books as well, but still having that average at 332 is like, it feels like I read a bunch of regular size books. Breaking it down per day, I read 160 pages a day in the month of January, which again seems like an awfully high number. One thing that's really cool, again because I'm tracking my stats, is that my star ratings for this year, I have incorporated half-star ratings, and it has changed my rating for books tremendously. I feel like already in the first 15 books that I've rated this year, it has given me a spot to put those books that, like, is it a 2? Is it a 3? Is it a 3? Is it a 4? And like just sort of really placing it where I truly think it is. Goodreads is obviously a little different because then I have to go sort of like, do I rate it up? Do I rate it down? Which sucks. And I've definitely seen a lot of people on my Twitter and on my Goodreads go, oh, you don't like this book because you rated it a 2, when in actuality I rated it a 2.5, which to me literally is average. I'll have a little blurby something up here. Alright, so I had one 1-star book, 0 1.5s, 1 2-star book, 3 2.5 stars, 3 3 stars, 3 3.5 stars, 2 4 stars, 0 4.5, and I had 2 5-star books. So really I hated one book this month and I really liked 2. If you take up the monthly average, my monthly average was a 3.2. Not great. I think based on my genres, you guys are gonna see probably why it wasn't great. Because my genres were varied AF this month. All thanks to several things, but you'll see. Here we go. This is where it gets fun. If you guys know my typical genres, you know I typically read horror, like mystery, and a lot of contemporary. So for the most part, those are my preferred genres. So you'll see. I read 1 classic, 1 fantasy, 4 mystery, 1 non-fiction, 2 historical, 1 horror, 1 humor, 1 thriller, 1 other, and 2 graphic novels. Yeah, so there's a lot of genres in there that are not my typical thing. Definitely the classic, the fantasy, the non-fiction, the historical, even the humor. Not stuff that I typically reach for. Out of all the books that I did read, I read 11 adult books, 1 middle grade, and 3 YA. Also in that I read 1 ARC, 2 audiobooks, and 12 physical books, which means that overall out of my existing TBR, I read 5.6% of books I own for the month, out of all the books I own. And then I like including my years. I just kind of go through them. I did not, unfortunately, read any 2019 releases in January, just because I had so many other things that I was expected to read that I think starting in February I'm going to try to read 3 new releases a month, or 2019 releases per month. We'll see how that goes. But in January I didn't read any 2019. I read a book released in 1897. 2001, 2007, 1982, 1973, 2014, 2011, 2018, 2000, 2014, 2018, 2017, 1982, 2016, and 2018. So I read a book released in the 1800s, all the way up to 3 2018 releases, so newer books. And then some in the 80s and the 70s, which are my Stephen Kings. Alright, so the book that I ended up rating 1 star worst book of January that I've read, and worst book that I've read in a long time actually. Starting the year off strong. That is Skipping Christmas by John Grisham. This was a book that Jeff picked out for me to read, and boy did I hate this. I wanted to like this. This is about the cranks who basically decide, because their daughter isn't going to be home for Christmas, that they are going to skip Christmas and save some money and go on a trip. Yet for some reason these people live on a street in the most like classist, racist like neighborhood in America, and every one of their neighbors basically shames them so hard into the fact that they are deciding to take a trip for themselves that they decide not to, and then their daughter comes back at like the last second. Listen, I don't care spoiling this book because it is such a garbage trash fire. I fucking hated every second of this. Like, I was texting Jeff while I read it because he picked these books for me to read, and I was like, what is this shit? It's short, thank God, because it's classist, like, just like, we're rich white people who live on this rich white people street, and oh, you better have that Frosty the Snowman up because we need to, like, I can't get into this. Like, her boyfriend, or their daughter brings a boy back from, I believe it was, Costa Rica, and the things that they refer to this character as is so freaking racist. It was just like, I'm reading it and I'm like, these people are garbage. They buy expensive like Christmas cards, and then the Christmas card company that year is like, why didn't you get our Christmas cards from us? You spend money on our Christmas cards every year. And like the guy's like harassing them to spend. These people just want to go on a fucking vacation. Let them live. But like, even them themselves are garbage. So like, I hated everything about this, and I rated it a 1. Not good. This is classified as a humor book, and I hated it. So next is a 2-star book classified as a historical. This was also one of my TBR Star Jar picks. That is Commonwealth by Anne Pratchett. 2 families who sort of come together over a baby christening and a lot of like gin and tonics. No, it sounds weird. Cheating and families coming together, and it's like a historical told over like one of those things where it's told over like 50 years and blah blah blah. And like, I'm all here for like a family drama book. You know, I like that, but like, I didn't get anything from this. There were so many characters and so many like step siblings and step kids, and whose kid belonged to whose person. Like, I had no idea who anyone was by the time I finished reading the book. Like, you would think by, you know, 300 pages that I'd have some graphs on like who's related to who. No clue. Abundantly clear that the parents didn't care for their kids whatsoever. The kids are just like left to their own devices, and then they wonder why one of them ends up injured or whatever. Where in the meantime they're like, alright kids, see you never, we're gonna go sleep into 2 p.m. Hopefully you don't kill your brother. Like, certain scenes in this, so I give it that. So I give it a 2. Like, it wasn't the worst book I read, but it wasn't great. So next is the first book that I read in 2019, and I rated it a 2.5. This is a classic, and that is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. It's a great illustrated classic. This is again another book that Jeff picked out for me to read, and I did not like this either. Basically, this quiet town exists, and this man rolls in and he's all wrapped up in bandages, and they come to find out that he is invisible. And let me tell you, the Invisible Man is basically an asshole. he's just mean. He steals things, and like, he's mean to people, and he's just like an asshole, and like, you know, like, at no point was he redeeming at all, and I hated him. I don't like the writing either. I appreciated it for what it was, and I don't know why I rated it 2.5. I probably should lower it to like a 1.5 or something. I don't like classics, guys. I don't know what to tell you, and this one is just not one that I liked. It's a middle grade too, like a classic middle grade. Again, not my thing. Thanks, Jeff, but I hate you for making me read that, so That's cool. So next is a book that I rated 2.5 stars, but on like the high part of that. That is one that Jeff picked out for me. That is Sula by Toni Morrison. It's hard for me to rate this sort of average because I understand that this book is not meant for me. It was written by a Black author about the lives of 2 Black women and how that affects them and how being Black in America affects your day-to-day life, basically. So I knew going into this that I was not going to relate to a lot of it. However, the reason why I gave this a 2.5 stars instead of anything higher is simply the fact that I did not vibe with the writing style whatsoever. I think that this is a really powerful book. The parts that I didn't enjoy, and the story is dark and layered and deep, and I felt like I missed a lot of the sort of how do I say this? Like literary meanings and symbolism and things underneath it, just because I'm not a literary fiction reader and I like my things sort of spelt out to me very clear, whereas I feel like there's a lot of undertones and subtleties that I miss just because I'm a stupid reader who just does not read a lot of literary fiction. But I do highly recommend this for Black History Month. I think it's a really important book, and it opened my eyes to a lot of experiences that I just simply don't get to experience because I'm a white woman in 2019. There's a lot of parts in this that were so hard-hitting and so dark and just intense that it was not an easy read, but I do highly recommend this to everybody. So I read Final Girls by Riley Sager, and I rated this book a 3. It's just, I don't know if I'm reading too many thrillers or if I'm just reading too many thrillers that don't truly thrill me, but it's not that I hated this book, it's just I keep seeing the endings coming. Like, I'm not surprised by anything. So this is a story about a group of women called the Final Girls, and basically they are the survivors of mass murders or mass killings or slaughterings or whatever, and they're the last ones there that survive. You know, 10 years later she meets the other Final Girls, and then some stuff goes down, and honestly from the get-go there is a character in this that I'm like, I don't know about that. Sort of suspicion just rang true for the entire book, and so I was reading it just sort of going, I bet you this person has something to do with it. And then like when that person had something to do with it, I was like, well, called it. Some twist and turns that I didn't see, but like the major one, I would say, I guessed pretty early on, so I wasn't super thrilled. So another one that I rated a 3 is The Lyon Game by Ruth Ware. So here is another thriller about girls coming back years later to talk to their people who they've experienced things with years ago. See, I don't even remember. I read so many books that were the same thing. These 4 friends bonded over what's called the Lyon Game, where they would like lie to people, and however deep and extreme their lies were, they'd like rate themselves, give themselves points and whatnot, and they have a secret amongst them, and that secret is about to be uncovered years later. This one I liked a lot better based on the atmosphere. Ruth Ware writes really good atmospheric books, like I can picture exactly where it is. However, my issue with most Ruth Ware books, and it's kind of the same in this one, is that her characters are written like horror movie characters, so like they're so stupid, and like they keep doing these things where it's like, honey, why? Like, you are leaving your husband and taking your newborn to, like, yeah, it's a place you've been before, but, like, it's this fucking place that floods and the electricity might shut out, and, like, you know, oh, let me just walk my baby through this, like, dark, friggin' slippery, watery path. Like, what? Like, you're so dumb. So, like, you're reading it and you're just screaming at the characters, like, oh, bitch, get out of there. Like, you best not do that. And she's like, oh, I think I'll just will. Like, it's like, fuck. Like, you know shit's gonna go down, but it's like, you... you can't, because as a reader you can't help them, you know, like, which is just, that's my feeling with most Ruth Ware. I'm like, girl, leave. So out of all the books that I've read by her, her characters keep putting themselves in scenarios. Literally the one thing that they could do is leave the premise. Just leave. Leave, get out, you know, like, just JoJo that shit and just leave. Yet they just stay there, and then they're like, herp-de-doop-de-doop, I wonder why bad things are happening. It's like, leave. Was I like super shocked by an ending of this? No. Am I angry in this review video? I don't know. I didn't read great books for like the majority of the month, so. Next, 3-star, at least I enjoyed the majority of this. That is my Stephen King read of the month. That is Different Seasons, this big hunkin' tome. This is a book broken into 4 novellas. So the first book is the Rita Hayworth story, which is basically a Shawshank Redemption. Then you have Apt Pupil, which is a story about this boy who is visiting this man that he knows is a Nazi and like a Nazi scientist. So like he did some like really dark, fucked up shit. And they're sort of blackmailing each other. Then you move into The Body, which is the basis for the movie Stand By Me. And that's a fantastic story in this. 5 stars. That one's excellent. And then the last one, I don't even remember the name of it because I didn't care for it that much. It is called it is called The Breathing Method. That one, what the fuck was that about? Wow, I just read it and I couldn't tell you what it's about. It's about this like gentleman's club, and they tell a story about this like woman that he meets and then whatever happens. It was pretty boring, not gonna lie. I ended up rating this a 3 because there's one story in there that's a 5, which is The Body. It's very much like young boys, summer nostalgia. They, you know, discover this dead body, or they hear about this dead body and then they go on this trek to discover it. It's about friendship, it's about bonding as like young teenage boys. Loved it. Gave me such strong like summer nostalgic vibes. It was wonderful. You know, Rita Hayworth one, Shawshank Redemption. I will say this time and time again, watch the movie. The movie is a much better experience than reading the book. The movie is one of my favorite movies of like all time, so there's that. The story itself is filled with a lot of like prison terms, a lot of homophobia, a lot of racism. I mean, kind of expected in like a story set in the 50s and 50s. I don't know if it's set in the 50s, but like say 70s even, 50s to 70s. There's a lot of that term and stuff in the book, and I'm just like, ugh, like it makes me cringe. It's a setup for the Shawshank Redemption if you guys want to read it. So I ended up rating that one more of like a 3. Then Apt Pupil was actually the one that like I hadn't heard anything about, and I read it and was pleasantly surprised. I actually fairly liked it. I got very much like Joe Hill, Charlie Manx vibes from the older man in that book. Very creepy, very ominous. I really liked the relationship that he had, sort of blackmailing each other between the older Nazi guy and the young boy who finds it out. Really interesting. That one kept me like page turning, so I ended up grading that one a 4. And then the last one I completely forget about and it was boring, so I don't know. The whole book I ended up rating a 3. Next I move into 3.5 stars. I have 3 of those. So the first one is another Stephen King. That is Stephen King's Creepshow, a graphic novel, and it follows 5 little short stories told in graphic novel format. But I love it because it's told by this guy, this character, which is called The Creep, and he sort of like narrates these stories and introduces them, and it's so much fun. There's a couple in here that like I really enjoyed, especially the last 2. They were very creepy, and the very last story in this gave me such the heebie-jeebs. I have a thing with bugs. I don't know if you guys know this, but bugs in and around people's bodies is like one of my like things that fucking creeps me out. Like I'm a big horror movie watcher and like horror reader, but like I can't handle that shit. No. And the very last story in this has everything to do with cockroaches and people's bodies. So as a graphic novel I was like, ah! And then apparently there's a live action film about it, and I'm absolutely not watching it because nope. I don't like cockroaches and bugs in and out of people's mouths. I can't do it. It's my one thing that gets me every time. It was a lot of fun. It was next on my list of Stephen King's to read, and I enjoyed it. And it did gross me the frick out, so it's doing what a horror is supposed to do. Alright, had to change my camera battery because I'm talking too much. Where's the lie though? Next 3.5 star book, again, mystery, thriller, YA. We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. This is interesting because the parts that I hated about this, I hated so strongly, but then the parts that I liked, I really liked. I really liked the writing style in this. It's very disjointed and like kind of weird and prosy, but like kind of just, I don't know how to describe the writing in this, honestly. It's sort of unlike anything I've read in a while. But the thing that I really hated about this is that it follows a group of teenagers who are very like chauncey, and a lot of you guys wondered what chauncey means. It's basically like rich, snobby, like hooty tooty, that kind of, I don't know how to describe it. That's chauncey to me. Follows these like rich people who are on this like rich island they go to, so like you don't really care about them, you know? But then it follows the story of this girl who, yeah, like you really can't say too much about the rest of this book, otherwise it's spoiler city. Needless to say, there's a lot that happened in this short book, and it's kind of wild, and I kind of saw some things coming and I didn't see other things coming, and you kind of hate all the characters while you're reading it. But if that's kind of your thing, where you don't really need to like everybody, then I suggest it. I thought it was interesting. There is one thing that happened in this that upset me very deeply, and if you've read this book, you know what it is. So, trigger warnings for upsetting stuff. Maybe Goodreads, some trigger warnings of that one. And then the last 3.5-star book that I have here is The Color of Lies by CJ Lyon. So much lying. It was really interesting. This is a mystery thriller. The characters in it have synesthesia. Am I saying that right? I hope so. I've said it in vlogs about 17 times and I'm like, I don't know if I'm saying that right. So basically she can see people's auras and see people's colors when they talk, and her aunt can like taste words or hear people's whatever, or their voices affect her. Her uncle can like taste words, stuff like that. So like that whole premise right there, really interesting, had me intrigued. That was really, really fun. And then sort of the mystery turn that this took, kind of weird. Kind of weird. Wasn't the biggest fan of it necessarily, but it took me on an interesting ride. I feel like this is almost a book that was in between like a YA characters, YA, you know, setting vibe, but then also sort of around the end of the book took me almost on like an adult thriller journey. That's the best way I can describe this without any spoilers. I liked what it did with the whole synesthesia thing. I thought it was a really interesting little addition to generic sort of YA thrillers. Alright, so I'm gonna get into the 4 books that I rated 4s and 5s. These are the things that I really enjoyed, so let's do it. First one is a fantasy book. You're like, really? Fantasy, but kind of like a surrealist fantasy book. That book is Going Bovine by Libba Bray. I always say Libra, but it's whatever. This is such a weird book, but I loved it. Like, I rated it a 4 and I loved it. This follows the story of this teenage boy who more or less gets mad cow disease, and so his brain is deteriorating, and in that he decides to go on a road trip with his friend, also a garden gnome who talks, who is also the immortal Viking god Balder, and some other characters like giant fire monsters and stuff. So all of that combined makes up this book that is so wonderfully weird and talks about disease and death and dealing with death, and it's like a coming of age story of accepting your reality, even though your reality is your brain making these hallucinations. Listen, I got a lot of stuff. Like, there's parts of this that sort of lead you to believe, like, is this all in his sort of head? Is he actually in one spot but then not here? And this was wild. I don't, other than that, like, I just don't know how to describe it other than it was just a journey. Really recommend it for people who want something truly weird and different. It was good. A non-fiction, I categorize it as non-fiction. I think Goodreads did as well. This is a book that Jeff picked out for me that I actually enjoyed. That is The Book of Awesome by Neil. Nope, can't pronounce that last name. It's by Neil. This is all little things that are awesome. That just makes up the book. Like, for example, hanging your hand out the car window. It's made up of all kinds of things, like solving the Wheel of Fortune puzzle before the people on the show, waking up and realizing it's Saturday, you know, little things like that. The smell of gasoline, the first time you fly alone. So I'm a person who lives in nostalgia and feelings and remembering the little things that are awesome in life. It doesn't take much to entertain me, and then I really reflect back on those little moments. And so a book like this is actually perfect for me because it just gives me warm fuzzies. The only thing that I didn't rate it a 5 was the fact there's a lot of things in here that I just simply haven't related to. A lot about driving and like being a vehicle owner, which I don't relate to. I don't drive, I don't own a vehicle. And you know, not everything is an experience that I go, yeah, I know what you mean. And so that's why I gave it a 4. But the ones that I did get like warm fuzzies about, I really like. So finally, we're going to talk about my 5-star books. Finally. Yeah, let's get into it. Both of which, fun books. Love it, fun. The first one I'm going to talk about is the continuation in a series, graphic novel series. I read Saga Volume 4. Can't talk about it because it's the 4th one in a series and that would spoil everything. But basically Saga is a like space opera kind of, with these really interesting just characters and creatures, battle, this war that's going on, and this like family relationship between these two people who are not really supposed to be together. It's just great. This one introduced a lot of drama and I loved it, and I'm excited to see, you know, where that goes. Saga's great. If you haven't read it yet, you should. Can I even show one panel in here that's like not a spoiler? There's my question. There's this guy. This guy's wicked cute. And then the last book, the best book that I read in January, and my absolute favorite book that I read, was a manga, and a horror manga, because I discovered that I love horror manga. At least by this author. I read Buzu Mackey by Junji Ito. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me, I'm not good at saying words, and especially names that I'm not familiar with in a language that I'm not familiar with. Correct me if I'm wrong. Also, I think it's manga. I don't know. That follows a town that is obsessed with spirals. And that is all I got when I went into it. And I heard that it was one of the creepiest, scariest books that people have read. This was suggested to me by Books in the Freezer podcast, which is a podcast all about horror recommendations. So if you haven't checked that out, you should. I don't even know if I can show you guys like any bits of this, because with a manga, almost all of it is spoilers because it's panel by panel. Maybe I'll show you this one, just so you guys can get a feel of like the art style. It's real creepy. There are definitely spots in this when I was reading it that evoked like a physical reaction from me. I went, I flipped the page and go, no, 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 this can't be happening. Because again, it touches on that one special part in things that I don't like, which is humans and bugs coming out of humans or going into humans. It's the one thing that really creeps me out, and this book had some of it. So many different things that have to do with spirals that like you start to see spirals in your day-to-day life. Like it's psychological in that sense, because it's like a town obsessed with spirals. What does that mean? And you start to think like, oh, what has spirals? Oh, I don't know, fingertips, the inner ear, hair sometimes can be curled into spirals. Snails, the wind, like, you know what I mean? Like all these things that sort of water, it's fascinating. This is such a piece of art. Like obviously it's art because it's manga and like it's like just drawn so amazingly, but it's such a work of like psychological horror and art that like I'm so utterly fascinated by every single one else of his works that I bought Toni, I bought Frankenstein, I bought Shiver, I bought like literally 5 more of his books before I was even finished this one. So that's how good that is. So if you're looking for a wild ride and you've never read manga before, I haven't either, and I rated that 5 stars and it was so friggin' good. that's my #1 recommendation for the month. It's very graphic. Like Julie, just don't. I always rate my ratings on whether or not Julie, Pages and Pens on YouTube if you're not familiar, she doesn't read horror, so I always go, could Julie handle this? No, because I barely handled parts of this. And it takes a lot for me to be, I guess, scared or horrified, and that book did it. So yeah, that is all of my 15 books. This video is long, I know, so I'm not going to waste any more of your guys' time. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these. Do you agree on my ratings? I think that the introduction of half-star ratings is really putting things in like a nice little category, and I'm really liking that. I'm going to continue that through the month of February. February hopefully is going to be a higher rated month because I plan on reading a lot of things that are rated 5 stars amongst my peers, and a lot of contemporary, which is more my vibe. A lot of those genres were not picked for me, and so I was sort of, you know, not to say forced, but it was more of a fun journey, experiment into whether or not I would like those. So yeah, that's a long video. So I do hope you guys are doing good, and until my next one, I will talk to all you soon. Bye.